I came to the topic of my problem of practice through a survey. My superintendent had assigned each of the principals to work with a mentor. This mentor gave me a survey to give to my staff. To this day, it is one of the most rewarding and traumatic experiences of my career as an educator. Ain't nothing worse than an anonymous survey. There were two statements that stuck with me. One, my principal cares about me, and secondly, I trust my principal. The results from the survey said that the first one got a positive response in the 90s. The second one, however, rated somewhere in the 70s. It was the difference between the two that shocked me. I couldn't understand how people could feel so strongly that I cared about them, yet didn't trust me. My colleague then gave me an article called The Black Box of Teacher Efficacy by John Safier, which talked about the different facets of trust. I had always equated empathy and compassion with trust, but for others there were other aspects that impacted their ability to trust, such as, say, reliability. Think of "you've got to earn my trust" or "trust takes time." As a relatively new administrator, that made sense. So when I first started down this road on my dissertation, I wanted to know which parts of the school community were the most important levers for building trust. I had also seen how detrimental broken trust could be in trying to build relationships with parents. As the principal, I often have to be the one to take the heat for the mistakes of others. For example, I once had a teacher who misread an IEP. Her mistake now became my inability to oversee my team. I also noticed that the place in which trust was most irrevocably damaged was in special education. Throughout this course, I've been thinking more deeply about power and privilege, and how as a white woman who's in charge, I often take this for granted and don't always consider how the systems, some of which I help create, others which I exercise, can influence the experience and access for others. As the building principal, my role puts me in a position of power over faculty, staff, students, and to a lesser extent, parents. It also gives me access to those who make district-wide decisions, such as central office staff and the school committee. I've come to realize in my time in this district that I am never not the principal. Things I say to a parent while I watch my own child's soccer game hold a different weight than other parents talking about the same thing. My opinion is never just mine. Trish Hill. It's always Principal Hill said this, or Principal Hill said that. In reading Sensoy and D'Angelo's Oppression and Power, I noticed that they mentioned that prejudice plus power equals oppression. In this piece, they talked about how in schools, decisions like the ones that I'm a part of can impact the structures, and that those can help or hurt those in my care. This is why it is so important that all educators do the important work of social justice. Only by understanding ourselves and our positionality can we then understand how we can impact these circuits of power and create opportunities for people, or to create systems of oppression. The example that comes to mind is one in which a parent of a student of color asked me to revisit a disciplinary decision made by my AP. In the scenario, the student had videotaped another student in a bathroom stall. After my conversation with his family, I realized that I wanted him to behave in a certain way, a way that white students would behave, and had not realized until later just how society has encouraged black men to record their interactions to show their innocence or to show the bad behavior of whites. This was just a small example of how my positionality and power had crossed paths with opportunity to be, as Kendi called it, an anti-racist. Kendi challenges people to recognize their privilege and to decide, are you a racist or an anti-racist? In the Badalina and Kimsey article, Should You Agitate, Innovate, or Orchestrate?, we each have to question where we can be most effective in this work. As Bell shared, social justice is a process and a goal. So where can we each contribute to that process, towards that goal? After reading about ableism, I connected the dots to my original problem of practice and felt like I could make the greatest impact in this area of social justice. A comment from an article by U.S. Representative Ayanna Pressley and Rebecca Coakley entitled "There is No Justice That Neglects Disability" resonated with me. A youth activist was quoted in the article and said, "Disabled people live at the intersection of all systems of oppression and social justice issues. There isn't one issue or one intersection that you will not find disabled individuals advocating for or experiencing the effects of those issues." In my school, this is the population that intersects across all aspects of the school environment. In How Can We Serve, Hook says, "The politics of domination as they are played out in the classroom, often to ensure that students from marginalized groups will not do well. I have to decide how I'm going to use my position to make sure that those in my care are not marginalized and not dominated." Finally, as I listened to Peggy McIntosh's TED Talk and read her article, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, I considered how I could use my positionality, my privilege, and my power to engage in this work and consider systems that impact the disabled community in my school, starting by considering all the ways a lack of privilege impacts them. For example, students without disabilities are assumed to be capable of grade level work. Students without disabilities are assumed to have to be able to control their emotions. Students without disabilities are assumed to have supportive families. It is these kinds of assumptions that impact my students with disabilities. And I think by taking myself through this activity, I can better understand ways in which my students with disabilities are oppressed in our district, and therefore what steps I can take to remedy this. Knowing that it is these systems that impact the trust with their families is how I tried to bring this full circle.